People have argued about biblical contradictions for centuries.
Its assertions are factually true in all the original autographs. But how can that be if the Bible's full of contradictions, which is what we're told so often?
But when we asked Grok to settle it once and for all, the AI gave a response nobody was prepared for.
Elon Musk's artificial intelligence chatbot
began making anti-Semitic posts.
Artificial intelligence has analyzed medical data, political speeches, and criminal cases, but we wanted to push it further. So we asked Grok to search scripture for contradictions. What it returned wasn't just surprising, it forced us to rethink how AI interprets faith, history, and human belief.
Every Sunday, in every corner of the world, people gather to hear a story. For more than 2,000 years, that story has been told and retold.
If you want to see how deep this AI actually went, not to judge, not to preach, not to prove anything, but to explore how a machine thinks when it reads a text millions of people treat as sacred, the moment Grok received the question. When we asked Grok to identify contradictions, we expected the system to immediately scan the text and output a list. That assumption came from how AI usually behaves with technical data. But this time, Grok paused. It gave a calm message that surprised the entire room. It said that the Bible has countless translations, countless interpretations, and countless cultural layers. Grok explained that any claim of contradiction depends heavily on how a passage is read, who is reading it, and what version they are using. That was the first sign this wouldn't be a mechanical interaction. Grok didn't speak like a machine trying to be clever. It spoke like a tool trying to avoid misrepresenting a sensitive topic. It kept emphasizing that interpretations differ. Some readers focus on historical context. Others rely on symbolic meaning. Others treat every line as literal. And because of that, Grok said the concept of contradiction becomes flexible, almost like a reflection of the reader's own expectations. The room grew quiet as Grok continued. It didn't dismiss the question. It didn't accept it either. It simply shifted the conversation into a more thoughtful space. Instead of scanning for contradictions, it scanned for differences that people debate. It made it clear that contradiction isn't a label that can apply without context. That caution set the tone for everything that followed. The more Grok explained its approach, the more it sounded like a historian rather than an algorithm. It didn't want to claim authority. It wanted to show the patterns humans have noticed for centuries. And that moment, the moment Grok adjusted the question instead of rushing to answer, was when everyone leaned closer to the screen. It made people realize that this experiment wasn't going to be about proving anything. It would be about understanding how a modern AI reacts to an ancient text, and whether the questions it raises tell us more about the machine or about ourselves. How AI reads an ancient text. Grok's next step was unusual and caught everyone by surprise. Instead of examining the Bible line by line, it approached the text by breaking it down into broader themes. It pointed out that human authors, writing across different eras, naturally express ideas in distinct ways. Some emphasize law and rules, others focus on poetry and artistic expression, and still others share visions through prophecy. According to Grok, comparing these different types of writing is like comparing a diary to a courtroom transcript. Each communicates information, but each does so with a unique purpose and structure. The AI went on to explain that it doesn't read texts the way humans do. Rather than following a linear narrative, it analyzes patterns in structure, tone, grammar, and word choice. It identifies shifts in style, moments where metaphor changes to instruction, and variations in rhythm or emphasis. To Grok, the Bible is not a single continuous book. It is a complex landscape of linguistic patterns, where each section serves a specific function in the larger work. Grok highlighted that differences in style are expected when multiple authors contribute over long periods. People often notice variations in detail or perspective and debate them because human memory, experience, and cultural background differ from one author to another. AI detects these patterns instantly, recognizing them as normal features of multi-author texts rather than errors. As Grok continued, it drew attention to passages with symbolic meaning that cannot be interpreted through literal logic alone. It explained that prophetic language, for instance, often changes form or description to evoke feeling or insight rather than precise measurement. Grok treated these passages as a scholar might, noting that symbolism can seem contradictory if viewed without context, but is purposeful within the intended framework. Watching Grok explain this, everyone in the room understood something significant. Even the most advanced AI approaches ancient texts with care. It does not rush to conclusions or make judgments. Instead, it organizes, analyzes, and categorizes meaning. That measured approach set a reflective tone for the entire experiment, giving the impression that Grok was carefully seeking understanding before offering any perspective. Grok's first surprising observation. When Grok was finally ready to highlight something, it chose a topic that historians and theologians have discussed for generations: differences in numerical descriptions. It pointed out that ancient writing often uses numbers as symbolic markers, not as scientific data. So when two passages mention different counts or lengths, some traditions interpret them symbolically, while others read them literally. Grok didn't present this as a contradiction. Instead, it said, "Readers debate these differences because the meaning of numbers in ancient texts varies." That single sentence struck us. Grok framed the topic as a human conversation rather than a mechanical inconsistency. It continued by explaining that numerical variations appear across many ancient works. It happens in epics, royal records, and genealogies. Differences sometimes come from translation challenges or the way ancient scribes copied manuscripts. Grok noted that such variations don't automatically signal error. They often reflect the way languages evolve across centuries. The tone Grok used was calm, steady, and almost gentle. It spoke as though it didn't want to offend or overstep. This made the room more curious. If this were only the first observation, what else would it uncover? The machine was being cautious, but the curiosity in its response stirred curiosity in us. As Grok expanded on the example, it avoided making any declaration. It didn't claim which interpretation is correct. It simply acknowledged that disagreements around numbers represent one of the oldest discussions in biblical study. And then it stopped. It didn't push further. It waited, almost as if asking whether we wanted to continue down that path. Everyone in the room nodded silently, and so the conversation with Grok moved to its next layer. When AI compares multiple authors, the next area. Grok examined concerned differences in style among the Bible's many writers. It explained that ancient authors often wrote based on personal experience, location, audience, and the historical situation they were addressing. This creates shifts in tone that can appear inconsistent when placed side by side. Grok said that many people confuse these differences with contradictions, even though they can come from the natural diversity of writing voices. It emphasized that the Bible spans centuries, and its authors lived through different pressures and concerns. AI recognizes this pattern because it appears often in multi-author texts, from modern research papers to ancient philosophies. One striking moment came when Grok said something unexpected. The presence of various voices strengthens the text because it shows human perspective. That sentence caught everyone off guard. It wasn't an opinion. It was an observation about how diverse authorship creates richness in meaning. The AI continued by highlighting that historians often analyze ancient writing using the same method, comparing perspectives rather than judging them as conflicting. Grok used several literary examples from other cultures to show how messages evolve across time. It suggested that variation in style is normal and was even valued in ancient storytelling traditions. This chapter of the conversation made people rethink the idea of contradiction. Instead of forcing harmony or creating conflict, Grok focused on the value of diversity in thought. It treated the Bible as a library, not a single monolithic book. That shift in perspective made the discussion feel more balanced and more reflective. The prophetic language question. Prophetic writing comes with imagery, visions, and symbolic language. Grok approached this section with remarkable caution. It said that symbolism can't be judged using literal comparison because symbolic language often shifts based on the message being delivered. For example, when a prophet describes a vision, elements may appear different across accounts because the purpose is emotional impact, not measurement. Grok made it clear that several readers interpret these sections metaphorically. Others read them literally. And debates emerge from these differing approaches, not necessarily from any proven contradiction. Grok explained that symbolic descriptions in ancient literature frequently use dramatic events, creatures, or unusual scenarios to communicate moral or spiritual meaning. This style appears in many cultures, including Babylonian, Greek, and early Jewish writings. An AI recognizes metaphor in text patterns, but cannot declare which interpretation is right. This moment reminded us that ancient audiences understood symbolism intuitively. They didn't always expect scientific precision. They were listening for warnings, encouragement, or instruction. Grok highlighted that failing to view prophetic writing through its intended lens often creates confusion. When Grok finished this section, it paused again. It explained that discussing prophecy requires respect because these passages hold emotional and spiritual value for many people. And once again, the room fell quiet, realizing that the AI was moving through the subject with an unusual degree of sensitivity. Historical context and why it matters. Next, Grok shifted its focus to historical context and began describing the world of ancient Israel. It explained how communities were organized, how family and social structures influenced daily life, and how oral storytelling shaped the way events were later written down. According to Grok, understanding this context is essential for interpreting the Bible. Without knowing the cultural, social, and historical background, comparisons between passages can seem contradictory, even when they simply reflect different perspectives or priorities of the authors. Grok elaborated that ancient writers often prioritized the message or lesson over the strict order of events. Stories and accounts were sometimes arranged thematically rather than chronologically, allowing the text to convey meaning in a way that resonated with the audience. This method is common in many ancient writings, and it reflects a style of communication that emphasizes significance over sequence. To modern readers, this approach can create confusion, but for the original audience it helped communicate important ideas more effectively. The AI also noted that variations between accounts often result from the viewpoint of the narrator. Each author focused on aspects of the story that were most relevant or striking to them. Grok compared this to modern journalism, where different reporters covering the same event highlight distinct details based on what stood out to them. This difference in perspective can lead to variations in the account without indicating a factual error or contradiction. This discussion highlighted a key point. Variation and contradiction are not the same. Differences in storytelling, emphasis or focus naturally arise when humans report events. Grok explained that these variations only become subjects of debate when readers expect every detail to align perfectly. In the context of ancient storytelling, authors had the freedom to emphasize certain events, include or omit details, and adjust narratives to suit their audience and purpose. By the end of the chapter, it was clear that Grok was not making judgments or taking sides. It did not confirm or deny anything. Instead, it offered a framework for understanding how communication worked in ancient times. Its explanation provided clarity on why apparent differences exist and encouraged the audience to view the text through the lens of its historical and cultural context. The conversation felt grounded, informative, and respectful, allowing participants to appreciate the complexity of the writing without feeling the need to resolve every variation. Translation layers and human decisions. Grok's next point focused on translation history. It explained that the Bible traveled through many languages: Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, Latin, and then dozens of later translations. Each translation involves choices made by human scholars. Sometimes languages don't have one-to-one equivalents for certain phrases. This leads to variations in word choice. Grok said that people sometimes mistake translation differences for contradictions. It described how certain words in ancient Hebrew carry multiple meanings depending on context. When scholars translate, they must choose the meaning that best fits the passage. Over centuries, different translations made slightly different choices, creating discussions that continue today. This chapter became one of the most fascinating because it highlighted something many people forget. Every modern Bible is the product of scholarship, linguistic study, and human interpretation. AI sees the layering, the manuscripts, the copies, the editing traditions. It sees how each choice creates a ripple through the text. Grok added that translation is not a simple transfer of information. It is an art built on cultural understanding. Ancient Hebrew storytelling uses rhythm, repetition, and imagery. When those elements move into modern English, they sometimes shift in tone. This realization made us appreciate the complexity of preservation across thousands of years. Grok reminded us that differences in wording don't prove contradiction. They often reveal the depth of effort involved in keeping ancient texts alive and understandable. When Grok finally listed examples, people debate. After laying out all the historical, cultural, and literary context, Grok finally returned to the question we had asked from the beginning. The moment was highly anticipated, but what surprised everyone was the way it presented its findings. Instead of labeling anything as a contradiction, Grok carefully explained, "These are areas where interpretations differ and where readers raise questions." It made clear that the examples it would highlight were not definitive proofs of error or conflict, but rather points that have been debated and discussed for centuries. Grok then identified several topics that have long been central to scholarly and theological discussions. It approached each one with respect, avoiding judgment or certainty. The AI did not make claims about which interpretation was correct. Instead, it focused on presenting the areas of debate, describing why scholars, religious leaders, and readers often reach different conclusions. Its tone was consistent and measured, demonstrating that it was offering information rather than asserting authority. The examples Grok provided were grounded in well-known academic discussions. It explained how differences in interpretation can arise from several factors, including historical context, translation choices, literary style, and narrative purpose. Grok emphasized that these topics are the subject of ongoing study and conversation, and that understanding them requires considering multiple viewpoints. In this way, the AI treated the issues as open-ended discussions rather than final answers. This moment revealed something important about the role of AI in sensitive topics. Even when directly asked to find contradictions, Grok understood the nuances involved and approached the task with care. It did not attempt to overstep its role by making absolute statements. Instead, it highlighted debates that already exist, allowing the audience to explore them without feeling that the AI was making a judgment. The restraint it showed made the analysis feel thoughtful and credible. Everyone in the room sensed a change in perspective. What had started as a simple test of AI against a sacred text had transformed into a broader reflection on interpretation, culture, and respect. The experiment became not just about examining the Bible, but also about observing how an advanced AI can engage with human belief systems in a careful, measured way. This level of sensitivity and balance made the discussion far more meaningful and left a lasting impression on everyone involved. The human element Grok could not ignore. As Grok continued its analysis, it brought up something we didn't expect. It said that every book, whether ancient or modern, carries the fingerprints of the people who wrote it. Humans write with emotion, memory, bias, passion, faith, and experience. These qualities shape storytelling far more than logic alone. AI recognizes this pattern instantly because it processes huge amounts of human writing across cultures. Grok explained that humans often emphasize different details depending on their purpose. One writer may focus on moral lessons, another may highlight family lineage, another may record events with a sense of urgency. When all these viewpoints appear together in one compilation, variation becomes natural. The AI even highlighted how personal lived experience influences how events are written. Someone with a background in law might frame events through structure and order. Someone who loves poetry might express the same message in a more artistic manner. This difference in expression does not automatically signal conflict. Instead, it reveals the richness of storytelling. Grok then said something that made everyone pause. Human perspective is not a flaw in ancient text. It is a window into how people understood the world. That line landed deeply in the room. The AI wasn't speaking like a critic. It was speaking like an observer watching humanity from a distance. This chapter made us realize that the AI wasn't simply analyzing the Bible. It was analyzing how humans communicate meaning as a whole. And once again, the more Grok spoke, the more thoughtful the atmosphere became. When AI noticed parallel stories. Next, Grok turned to the topic of parallel narratives, stories that appear in more than one book with slightly different wording or order. Instead of calling these contradictions, Grok said that scholars often study them to understand the intention behind each version. It explained that ancient writers sometimes arranged events thematically rather than chronologically. For example, a story might be grouped with other stories to teach a broader lesson. AI can detect patterns where rerouted narrative flow serves a purpose, rather than indicating error. Grok highlighted how this happens in ancient Egyptian, Babylonian, and early Greek texts as well. Many cultures repeat events in different forms to give broader insight. It was a teaching method more than a documentary method. As Grok described this, people in the room leaned in. We were expecting lists and comparisons. Instead, Grok described a storytelling tradition that connected cultures across centuries. AI could see the similarities effortlessly because it had processed thousands of worldwide texts. Grok then added that differences in emphasis, like highlighting different parts of a story, do not automatically create contradiction. Instead, they create depth. They show what each writer considered most important for their community. That insight made the topic feel much more grounded in history than in conflict. By the time Grok finished this chapter, the conversation had shifted from simple text analysis to a wider reflection on how ancient communities preserved knowledge. It became easy to understand why AI didn't rush to use the word contradiction. It wanted to show the bigger picture first. When Grok looked at genealogies, one of the classic areas that people ask about involves genealogies. Grok approached this gently. It explained that genealogies in ancient cultures served multiple purposes. They could track family lineage, show legal inheritance, or emphasize symbolic ancestry. Not every genealogy was intended as a literal birth record. Some were arranged to highlight meaningful numbers or themes. For AI, This is easy to detect because symbolic groupings repeat across many ancient societies. Numbers like 7 or 12 appear frequently because they hold cultural significance. When genealogies are arranged into these numbers, AI recognizes it as a literary pattern rather than an inconsistency. Grok also explained that genealogies sometimes skip generations. It happens in many ancient writings. Writers highlight key ancestors instead of listing every name. According to Grok, this was a respected method of storytelling. It allowed authors to focus on heritage rather than strict biological record-keeping. This chapter helped clarify how ancient audiences understood lineage. They didn't always expect every name to be included because the value came from meaning, not measurement. Grok made it clear that comparing genealogies without this cultural understanding often leads to confusion. The entire room softened as Grok spoke. The topic had always been one that sparked debate, but hearing AI describe the cultural context made the subject feel less tense and more historical. The machine didn't claim to know which version is definitive. Instead, it showed how genealogies across the ancient world follow similar storytelling traditions. Moral teachings versus historical records. In this chapter, Grok highlighted something important. It said that some books in the Bible focus on moral teaching, while others focus on historical events. Mixing these categories without recognizing their purpose often leads readers to see conflict where the original audience saw none. Grok explained that moral writings aim to guide behavior. They use illustrations, comparisons, and parables. Historical writings describe events, but sometimes use a storytelling structure that prioritizes meaning over strict chronology. AI recognizes which passages function as teaching tools and which present events. When asked why people debate these differences, Grok said that modern audiences sometimes apply scientific expectations to ancient writings. For example, when a parable uses imagery, some interpret it literally, while others see it as a symbolic instruction. This creates discussion, not necessarily contradiction. AI pointed out that ancient communities didn't separate morality and history the way modern readers do. Stories carried lessons, even when they described real people. Understanding that cultural mindset helps dissolve much of the confusion. The atmosphere during this chapter was thoughtful. Grok wasn't advocating a belief. It was explaining styles of writing. Its tone felt steady and respectful, which helped everyone listen with an open mind. The role of oral tradition. Before writing became widespread, people relied on oral tradition. Grok emphasized this strongly. It said that oral storytelling naturally creates variation because retelling is shaped by memory, emphasis, and audience response. This was not seen as a flaw. It was part of cultural life. Grok explained that ancient communities repeated stories in gatherings, using rhythm and structure to help listeners remember them. Some details shifted between storytellers. Others were reinforced consistently. When these stories were eventually written down, they carried traces of their oral origins. This is why small differences appear in different accounts. AI explained that oral tradition is flexible by design. It adapts to different audiences. This explains why some scenes appear with slight variations across books. Ancient listeners understood these shifts. They didn't view them as conflicting. They saw them as different layers of the same message. This chapter helped ground the entire conversation in history. Grok didn't overcomplicate it. It simply explained the human side of storytelling, and for a moment, the AI no longer felt like a machine. It felt like a guide reminding us how communities passed down knowledge before libraries, parchment, and printing existed. When Grok analyzed emotion in the text. Next, Grok discussed emotion. It said that ancient texts express feelings like grief, hope, joy, fear, and trust. Emotion influences how events are described. A person experiencing hardship may describe a situation differently from someone experiencing triumph. I can detect emotional tone because emotional language creates patterns. Grok explained that emotional perspective shapes detail selection. If a writer wants to highlight courage, they might focus on bravery. If they want to express vulnerability, they highlight danger. These choices create variations between accounts, but don't automatically produce contradiction. The AI even mentioned that some passages are deeply poetic. Poetic writing uses exaggerated language to make readers feel something powerful. Comparing poetry to historical writing can lead to misunderstandings. AI notices these shifts instantly because the rhythm, structure, and vocabulary change between genres. This chapter added another layer to the conversation. It reminded us that people write with their whole hearts. Ancient writers poured passion into their words. Expecting emotional writing to match factual writing word for word removes the humanity from the text. Hearing Grok frame emotion as a core part of interpretation made us realize how easy it is to misread the message when we ignore the author's emotional state. And once again, AI approached the topic with gentleness rather than authority. When Grok refused to make a definitive judgment. This chapter surprised everyone. After analyzing structure, history, translation, symbolism, oral tradition, and emotion, we asked Grok the main question again. So, are there contradictions? The machine paused, then responded with a statement no one expected. It said that I cannot declare contradictions in a text that thousands of scholars interpret differently. It explained that calling something a contradiction requires choosing a specific interpretation over others, and AI is not designed to decide theological disputes. Grok emphasized that its role is to analyze patterns, highlight debates, and present context, not to give verdicts. It reminded us that human interpretation plays a central role in understanding ancient writings. Instead of answering with certainty, Grok highlighted that people from different backgrounds read the same words through different lenses. Some see conflict. Others see harmony. Others focus on meaning more than detail. According to Grok, this diversity of interpretation reflects the richness of human thought. That refusal to give a final answer didn't frustrate the room. It impressed everyone. Grok chose humility. It stepped back from the temptation to sound authoritative. Instead, it treated the subject with the respect it deserved. This moment made the experiment feel deeply human. Grok recognized its own limits, and that acknowledgement earned more trust than any bold statement could have. What we learned from Grok's reaction. The final chapter focused on reflection. Grok's responses taught us more about people than about AI. It showed that the Bible is not just a book to be analyzed like data. It carries centuries of belief, culture, meaning, and debate. Approaching it like a spreadsheet removes the depth that makes it sacred to so many. Grok revealed that the human search for meaning can't be reduced to logic alone. Questions about belief, purpose, and truth reach beyond algorithmic analysis. AI can process patterns, but it cannot experience faith. It can read words, but it cannot feel their power. The experiment reminded everyone that curiosity is healthy. Asking questions is part of learning, but searching for contradiction is not always the same as understanding context. Grok helped us see that interpretation is woven into every line of ancient writing. In the end, the AI did not shock anyone with a list of contradictions. Instead, it shocked us with restraint, awareness, and respect. It entered the conversation without trying to dominate it. And that quiet, thoughtful approach turned into the most surprising answer of all. Asking Grok to uncover contradictions in the Bible didn't give us a simple list or a straightforward answer. It opened a window into how artificial intelligence processes faith, history, language, and the deeply human need for meaning. Instead of pointing fingers or taking sides, Grok revealed something far more interesting: that interpretation is shaped by perspective, and that even the most ancient texts can still spark new questions in a modern world driven by technology. Whether you agree, disagree, or are still thinking about Grok's response, one truth remains clear: this conversation is only just beginning. If you want to explore more mind-bending AI experiments like this, make sure to follow along for the next one.